Everyone at the table was laughing and chatting, celebrating the end of my college journey. The dinner was full of smiles, clinking glasses, and the usual family chatter about achievements and future plans. My grandparents sat at the head of the table, beaming with pride. Grandma leaned over to me with a gentle smile and said, "I'm glad the $1,500 I send you every month has been helping." I froze for a moment. The words hit me like a wave, but not for the reason she thought. I took a deep breath and said quietly but firmly, "I never got any money." The laughter stopped instantly. The sound of forks clattering against plates echoed in the sudden silence. All eyes turned to my parents, Clifford and Margot Winslow. Their faces turned pale, and for the first time, they didn't know what to say. The smug smiles they wore moments ago disappeared. I could see the shock in the eyes of my cousins and aunts and uncles. Even my younger brother, who usually tried to act important, looked confused and uneasy. Grandma blinked at me, still smiling softly, but there was a hint of surprise in her eyes. I had expected her to feel betrayed, but she remained composed. Growing up, my parents always talked about supporting me and helping me succeed. They promised things that never came true: college tuition, extra help with books, small allowances. Every time I asked, they had an excuse ready. Sometimes they blamed money. Other times they said I should work harder or rely on myself. I learned to do everything alone. I worked part-time jobs, took scholarships, and sometimes went without things my classmates had. Despite all that, I never let it stop me. I studied hard, stayed focused, and held on to the hope that one day I would make them see who I really was. Today was that day. Today was my graduation, and I had made it on my own, without the support they claimed to give. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting for someone to speak. My parents tried to open their mouths, but no words came out. I could see the embarrassment in their eyes, the guilt that had no excuse. My heart raced, but I stayed calm, letting the truth settle like a shadow over the table. I had always known that this moment would come, the moment where honesty met deception, and now it had. It was not about revenge yet, but about recognition, finally showing everyone that I had achieved everything by myself. The look on their faces said more than words ever could. The years of betrayal and neglect had left their mark, but tonight, I had the last word. I sat back in my chair, letting the silence speak for me, feeling a strange mix of relief, pride, and quiet satisfaction. It was just the beginning, but for now, the truth had been told. When I was a child, life at home was quiet but tense. Our house was not poor, but it never felt warm. My parents, Clifford and Margot Winslow, seemed to care more about appearances than about me. They were always busy with their own plans, their own friends, and their own lives. I often felt invisible, like my needs didn't matter. My cousin Jemima lived with us part of the time, and from the very start, it seemed like she was the favorite. Every birthday, every little achievement, every good grade, she was praised endlessly. My parents would shower her with gifts, new clothes, and attention, while I was told to be grateful for what I had, or stop asking so many questions. I remember trying to explain how I felt, but it was like speaking into a wall. I was always careful to do what was expected, to be polite, to try and earn their approval, but it rarely worked. When I asked for help with school supplies or something small like a book I needed for class, they would sigh, shake their heads, and promise it next week, or say I should save my allowance. Sometimes I would wait and hope, only to find the promise forgotten or ignored. One afternoon, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my math workbook open, tears prickling my eyes. I had a test coming up, and I didn't understand a section. I asked my mom for help. She barely looked up from her phone and said, "You'll figure it out. You're smart enough. Stop wasting my time." I tried asking my dad later for a calculator I needed for school, and he muttered, "We'll see," and walked away. That was the answer I got for everything. We'll see. But nothing ever came. Even though it hurt, I learned early that I had to rely on myself. I worked hard at school, practiced on my own, and saved small amounts of money from birthdays or odd jobs just to get what I needed. I watched Jemima receive everything easily, and I tried not to be jealous, but sometimes it was impossible. The unfairness of it all stayed with me, like a quiet anger that never left. I wanted love and support, but my parents gave me lessons in self-reliance instead. Their promises were empty, their attention selective. Every time they ignored me or favored Jemima, I felt smaller, but it also made me stronger. I realized that if I wanted something, I had to go after it myself. Those early years shaped me, teaching me to survive, to be resourceful, and to never trust words alone. Even then, I dreamed of proving them wrong one day, not with anger, but with success. I wanted them to see that despite their neglect, I could stand on my own and accomplish more than they ever imagined. The memory of those small rejections, ignored cries for help, and quiet favoritism stayed with me, fueling a determination I carried into everything I did. College was supposed to be a fresh start for me, a place where I could finally breathe and make a life of my own. But it wasn't easy. Every semester came with new bills, and every bill reminded me that I was on my own. My parents had promised to help, but their help never came. They didn't answer my calls when tuition deadlines got close, and they always had some excuse about how money was tight right now. I stopped asking after a while. To stay in school, I worked part-time at a campus cafe and took any paid internship I could find. My mornings started before sunrise, and my nights ended long after midnight. Between classes, work, and assignments, I barely had time to eat or sleep. The exhaustion was heavy, but quitting wasn't an option. I told myself that every tired morning, every skipped meal, was one step closer to the life I deserved. That's when I met my roommate, Marceline Tate. Everyone called her Marcy. She was full of energy, always humming to herself, and somehow made even the dullest days brighter. From the first week, she noticed how I struggled to balance everything. Sometimes she would sit beside me late at night, bringing me a sandwich or a cup of tea, saying, "You can't pour from an empty cup, Leora. Take care of yourself too." Marcy came from a big, loving family, and she often shared stories about how her parents supported her through every decision. It made me happy for her, but deep down, I couldn't help feeling a sting of jealousy. Whenever she got care packages from home or surprise calls from her mom, I smiled on the outside, but inside, I wondered why my parents couldn't be like that. She once asked me why I never talked about my family. I didn't know what to say. I just shrugged and said, "They're busy people." She gave me a long look and said softly, "Busy shouldn't mean absent." Her words stayed with me. Every time I saw Marcy's parents visit campus, bringing homemade food or helping her with small expenses, the resentment inside me grew. I remembered the times I'd begged my parents for a small amount, just enough for books or groceries, and how easily they brushed me off. I had tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but as the months passed, it did. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. Still, I kept pushing forward. My grades were good, my professors noticed my effort, and the cafe manager said I had a strong work ethic. Each compliment made me feel stronger, more in control. I began to realize something important. I didn't need my parents to survive. But a small part of me started to dream of the day they'd realize what they'd lost. The day they'd see the daughter they ignored become everything they never believed she could be. That quiet thought became my secret motivation. I didn't know it then, but that's when the idea of proving them wrong started taking root in my heart. The morning of graduation felt like a dream. The sun was shining, the air smelled like summer, and the campus was full of families taking pictures and laughing together. I stood in front of the mirror in my black gown, the tassel brushing my cheek, and took a deep breath. I had made it. After all the years of working late, skipping meals, and surviving on scholarships and part-time jobs, I was finally graduating with top honors in business administration. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I heard cheers from somewhere in the crowd. My heart hoped it was my parents, but when I looked out, they were sitting still, clapping politely, their expressions blank. Grandma, though, was on her feet, smiling so wide I thought she might cry. That smile gave me strength. I smiled back at her before leaving the stage. After the ceremony, families were hugging, taking pictures, and celebrating loudly. My classmates were surrounded by their parents holding flowers and gifts. I stood with Grandma, who wrapped her arm around me proudly. "You did it, my girl," she said softly. "You made me proud." I thanked her, blinking back tears. She was the only one who ever believed in me without asking for anything in return. My parents eventually walked over, their smiles looking more like masks than real happiness. "We're proud of you," my mother said in a voice that sounded rehearsed. My father nodded, adding, "You've made the family look good." That line stuck with me, look good. That was all this day was to them, a photo opportunity to show off to relatives. I smiled for the pictures, but inside, I felt a mix of sadness and anger. That evening, we gathered for a dinner arranged by my parents. It was at a fancy restaurant, filled with chatter and laughter. My cousins joked about who would make the most money after college, and my parents told stories about how hard they worked to support me. I stayed quiet, just listening. Then Grandma, sitting beside me, turned to me with her usual warm smile and said, "I'm so glad the $1,500 I send you every month has been helping. You managed everything so well, Leora." I froze. My fork slipped from my hand, and I felt everyone's eyes on me. I looked at her, trying to make sense of what she had said. "Grandma," I said slowly, "I never got any money from you." The table went silent. My parents stopped smiling. Grandma's face changed slightly, confusion clouding her eyes. She looked at my mother and father. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I've been sending it to your parents' account for 4 years." My father's throat tightened. My mother reached for her glass of water, but couldn't hide her trembling hands. The air was thick with tension. My cousins glanced at each other, whispering. Grandma set her fork down gently, her voice calm but firm. "So, where did the money go?" No one spoke. I looked at my parents, and for the first time they couldn't look back at me. In that heavy silence, everything made sense, the struggles, the empty promises, the excuses. They had taken what was meant for me. I didn't say another word. I didn't have to. The truth was finally out, and the looks on their faces told me that this was only the beginning. The silence after Grandma's question felt endless. No one at the table moved or spoke. My parents sat frozen, their smiles gone, their eyes darting everywhere but at me. Grandma was the first to speak again. Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge in it. "Clifford, Margot, is there something you want to tell us?" My mother laughed nervously, her hand gripping her napkin tightly. "Mom, you must be mistaken," she said. "We've always taken care of Leora. You know how proud we are of her." Grandma's face didn't soften. She looked at me and said quietly, "Sweetheart, are you sure you never received the money I sent?" I nodded slowly. "I'm sure, Grandma. You said you sent $1,500 every month." I never got even a single dollar. There was a low murmur around the table. My cousins exchanged glances, my aunts leaned forward, and even the younger ones stopped talking. My father cleared his throat. "That's ridiculous," he said, his voice louder than before. "We used that money to pay her expenses directly. Tuition, books, things like that." I met his eyes and kept my voice steady. "Dad, I paid for all my tuition through scholarships. And the books? I bought them secondhand or borrowed them from classmates." The color drained from my mother's face. My father shifted in his seat, trying to maintain control of the situation, but it was slipping away fast. Grandma turned to them again. "I want to see the receipts then," she said. "Show me what you used the money for." No one moved. My father took a sip of water, pretending to stay calm. My mother looked down at her plate. I could feel the heat of embarrassment and anger spreading through the table. My uncle, who had been quiet until now, muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just sat there, speaking calmly, each word steady. "You told everyone I was struggling because I didn't know how to manage money. You made it sound like I was lazy or careless. But all this time, I was fighting to survive while you were spending what Grandma sent to help me." My father tried to speak again, but his voice cracked. "You don't understand how things were. We had bills." I interrupted softly. "You had choices." That was the moment everything changed. My words weren't loud, but they were strong. I saw it in their faces, shame, fear, and the realization that their excuses no longer worked. Grandma didn't yell, but her disappointment filled the room more loudly than any shout could have. She pushed her chair back and said quietly, "I trusted you with that money. You stole not just from Leora, but from me." I felt my chest tighten, but I held my head high. For the first time, I didn't feel small around them. I felt in control. I had spent years working to stand on my own, and now everyone could see the truth for themselves. The dinner ended early. No one ate dessert. My parents left the restaurant without saying a word. I stood there beside Grandma as she gently held my hand. Her eyes were sad but proud. "You've grown into a strong woman," she said softly. And in that quiet moment, I realized that I no longer needed their approval. I had my dignity, my strength, and the truth, and that was more powerful than anything they had ever taken from me. After that night, nothing felt the same. The truth had changed everything. My parents tried to pretend it never happened, but I couldn't live under the same roof anymore. I packed my things quietly one morning and left their house without looking back. I didn't take much, just a few clothes, my laptop, and the savings I had built from years of part-time jobs. For the first time, I felt free. I rented a small studio apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were bare, the furniture was secondhand, yet every piece of it felt like a step toward the life I wanted. I knew I couldn't depend on anyone, so I made a promise to myself. I would build something from the ground up, something no one could ever take from me. I'd always been good with numbers, and during college, I had learned a lot about business and finance. I started researching small investment ideas, stocks, local startups, anything that could grow over time. Using what little money I had saved, I began cautiously investing. Some days I failed, but I learned quickly. Around that time, I met Harlan Beckett, a retired businessman who used to visit the cafe where I worked part-time. He was quiet but observant, always reading financial newspapers. One day, he noticed the spreadsheet open on my laptop and asked what I was working on. When I told him about my small investments, he smiled and said, "You remind me of myself when I was young, hungry to make something out of nothing." Over the next few months, Harlan became more than a regular customer. He became my mentor. He taught me how to study markets, how to spot opportunities, and most importantly, how to stay patient. He said, "Revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about rising so high that they can't touch you anymore." His words stayed with me. With his guidance, I grew more confident. I started taking small risks that began to pay off. The first time one of my investments doubled in value, I sat on my couch, smiling quietly, realizing this was the beginning of something much bigger. I registered a small business called LW Investments and started managing funds for a few local clients. At night, when I looked out the window of my apartment, I sometimes thought of my parents. I wondered if they ever regretted what they did. But instead of letting anger control me, I turned it into fuel. Every early morning, every late night spent studying numbers was a step toward proving them wrong. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to outgrow them. My revenge would be silent but powerful. One day, they would see the life I built from their lies, and they would know that I succeeded not because of them, but in spite of them. With every plan, every investment, I moved closer to the life I had always dreamed of. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I was becoming someone they would have to notice, even if they didn't want to. My parents continued to live their proud and flashy life while I quietly built mine. They had no idea what I was doing. Every weekend, they threw big parties, wore expensive clothes, and showed off new cars. They loved talking about their success, as if they had done it all alone. Whenever someone asked about me, they just said I had moved on, like I didn't matter anymore. While they lived in their world of pride, I worked hard every single day. With the help of Mr. Beckett, my mentor, I learned how to make smart business choices. I started small, investing in local companies and new startups. Slowly, my business began to grow. I used a different name for my investments so no one would know it was me. I wanted to stay hidden and let my work speak for itself. Soon, my investments started competing with my parents' businesses. Some of their customers switched over to mine, and I knew it was just the beginning. They didn't notice. They were too busy enjoying their wealth. When they finally heard about a new investor rising fast in the market, they laughed it off. They thought no one could ever compete with them. They didn't realize it was their own daughter quietly building something bigger. I didn't want to destroy them completely. I just wanted them to feel what I once felt, ignored and underestimated. Every step I took was part of a calm, careful plan. I didn't act out of anger anymore. I acted with purpose. I wanted to prove to myself that I could rise above them using wisdom, not revenge. As time passed, people started whispering about me, though they didn't know my real name. They talked about the mysterious investor who always made smart moves and never failed. My parents' businesses started losing money, but they still didn't connect the dots. They believed they were untouchable. Sometimes I saw their pictures online, smiling, surrounded by people who only cared about their money. I would look at those photos and smile quietly. They once called me weak and foolish, but now I was stronger than ever. I wasn't that helpless girl they turned their backs on. I had built something real, something they couldn't take away. The tension kept growing. My parents were still proud, still blind to the storm coming their way. But I knew the truth. Every smart move I made brought me closer to the justice I had been waiting for. I didn't need to shout or show off. I just needed to keep going. One day soon, they would finally see who I had become, and realize the daughter they cast aside had become their greatest rival. I started to make quiet but powerful moves. Using the profits from my small business, I began buying property near my parents' investments. I didn't tell anyone my plans. I studied their business carefully, found their weak points, and made sure my next steps would matter. I hired smart, loyal people, those who believed in my vision. Together, we built something strong, something steady. Each small win felt big to me. I didn't rush. I took my time and learned from every mistake. Slowly, the money started to flow in. My new company began to stand out in the market. People started trusting my work because I always delivered on my promises. My mentor, Mr. Beckett, often said, "Success that grows quietly is the kind that lasts." I took his words to heart. Sometimes I met my parents at family gatherings. They would smile in that proud, fake way, asking about my little business. I could see the mockery in their eyes, but I stayed calm. I never let them know how much I had achieved. Once my father laughed and said, "You should stop wasting time and come work for us." I smiled and replied softly, "Thank you, but I'm doing just fine." Inside, I felt strong. They still didn't know they were talking to the woman slowly taking over their market. I kept investing, kept learning, and kept growing. Every new deal gave me confidence. My team respected me not just as a boss, but as someone who understood struggle. I treated them with kindness, the kind I had always wished for myself. It made me proud to lead by example. The more I succeeded, the more I realized I didn't need loud revenge. My power was in my silence, in every smart move I made. My parents still looked down on me, thinking I was too young to be a real competitor. But their underestimation was my biggest weapon. When I saw them boasting about their success at a public event, I just watched quietly from a distance. I didn't need to prove anything yet. I knew that one day they would finally face the truth, that their daughter, the one they ignored, was not only standing on her own but standing taller than they ever imagined. And that day was coming soon. The day I bought the company they bragged about felt unreal. I used the business name no one knew was mine. I did not want to fight. I wanted the truth to be seen. The company had always been a symbol of my parents' status. They would talk about it at dinners and parties like it proved they were important. I knew that if I owned it, the story would change. The sale was quiet at first. I met with brokers, signed papers, and waited. When the news came out, it hit like thunder. Local papers and business websites posted the story. The company had a new owner. My parents were at a charity event that night. They read the headlines on their phones and laughed, thinking it was a mistake. Then someone pointed to the article. The names were real. Their laughter stopped. They called me the next day, their voices high and sharp. "How did this happen?" my father demanded. My mother sounded confused and angry. They accused someone else of tricking them. They could not believe their own daughter had outmaneuvered them. At first, I stayed quiet. I let them feel their shock. That afternoon, we met in the same hall where they had once praised me for being polite and practical. This time, the room felt different. I walked in and saw their faces. Pride had turned to anger. They spoke fast, trying to tear the truth into pieces with words. I listened. I did not shout. I did not cry. I told them simply that I had worked, saved, and planned for years. I said that the money they claimed to send me never reached me. I explained how I learned to invest and how I had help from honest people who believed in my work. I said it so calmly that every word weighed more than any loud accusation. My father's face turned red. My mother looked away. They tried to show receipts and paperwork, but nothing matched what Grandma had said. The evidence was thin, and people at the meeting began to murmur. They had built their lives on show. Now the show was breaking. I wanted them to understand, not to be humiliated for the sake of it. So I spoke about what mattered. I said I did not buy the company to hurt them. I bought it because I wanted stability and respect. I told them I had wanted them to be proud of me for what I became on my own, not for what they pretended to do. When I finished, the room was full of silence. That quiet felt like the justice I had waited for. My parents had no speech ready. Their defenses fell away. A few people in the room looked at them differently. They had always assumed the family's wealth meant something real. Now they saw a different truth. I left without shouting or gloating. I felt calm and strong. I had not only gained a business. I had taken back my dignity. The worst part of my past was not gone, but it no longer controlled my future. I had shown the world and my family that I could rise without their help. That was the real victory. After that day, my life began to change in quiet but powerful ways. People started to see me for who I really was, not just the daughter of Clifford and Margot Winslow. My company grew faster than I ever expected. I was invited to speak at business events and share my story about hard work and resilience. I didn't talk about revenge or pain. I talked about growth, about learning how to stand when no one holds your hand. The respect I earned wasn't loud. It came in small, meaningful ways. Former clients called to thank me for keeping my word. Young entrepreneurs reached out for advice. Every time I helped someone, I remembered the girl I used to be, the one who had begged her parents for support and got silence instead. That memory didn't hurt anymore. It pushed me forward. My parents, on the other hand, grew quiet. The arrogance they once carried started to fade. My father tried to visit me at the office one afternoon, looking older and unsure. My mother sent a long message, full of half apologies and words like misunderstanding and regret. I didn't reply immediately. It took time for me to decide what kind of peace I wanted. In the end, I chose not to cut them off completely. But I also didn't let them too close again. I saw them on holidays, spoke politely, and kept our conversations short. I no longer needed their approval, and I made sure they knew that. Distance became my way of protecting myself. I had spent too long trying to earn love from people who gave it only when others were watching. One weekend, I drove out to visit Grandma. She was sitting on her porch, knitting a soft blue scarf. When she saw me, her face lit up with that warm smile I had missed for years. I sat beside her, and for a while we didn't talk. The wind moved gently through the trees, and everything felt peaceful. Then she looked at me and said softly, "You did well, Leora. You turned pain into purpose." I smiled, feeling tears build in my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," I told her. "You were the only one who saw me." She patted my hand and said, "Sometimes the best revenge isn't cruelty, it's success." As the sun set that evening, I realized she was right. I didn't need to destroy anyone to win. I had already won by becoming everything they said I couldn't be. My story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom, dignity, and quiet strength, the kind that no one can take away once you've earned it.